get things rolling. So welcome everybody to this ACE 101 webinar series. Today we have Terry Kind and Larry Hurtubise who are going to be presenting, and I'm just going to turn it over to them so they can introduce themselves and get the ball rolling.
So I'm Larry Hurtubise. I'm a curriculum and instruction consultant at the Michael V. Drake Institute for Teaching and Learning at The Ohio State University. And I'm getting my PhD in curriculum and instruction, where I'm studying the professional identity formation of clinician educators.
And thanks for the invitation for us to co-lead this. I'm Terry Kind. I'm an Associate Dean for Clinical Education and a Professor of Pediatrics at the George Washington University and at Children's National Hospital. And I've enjoyed working with Larry on how to think through making good choices in educational technology. And notably, I think I only know Larry through technology. So it's been great in the use of in the development of our professional relationship. So today we want to make the most of the hour taking you through these objectives. We will have you think about your role as an educator and a leader in making some technology choices. We're going to take you through backward instructional design and universal design for learning, which some of you may be familiar with or may be new to some of you. We'll think a lot about how context impacts what technology choices you make in the setting of the learning environment, and then what you do and don't control in your educational environment will play a big role. And then we'll bring in some evidence and some of the literature in how you can make technology choices to support your learners and the learning process. And this on the right-hand slide really depicts that these concepts are very much interrelated with each other. So to get at that first objective, let's think about what is your role and then your specialty as well. And as you think about that, consider how this relates to technology use in education. So some of you may be directors or administrators, most of you are leaders, some of you are tech users. So we'll go to a poll and we'll have you respond with what your role is and what your specialty is. Think about, could you do your role without technology? So
we're using Poll Everywhere for this. And so what you'll notice is just on a device, you can text in OSU ITL to the number 37607 to join it. And then you can, and you only do that once in today's session. So I'm seeing messages already come through.
Throughout the hour, we'll make use of a few different technological Q&As just to show you a few. Okay, so we have some clerkship folks, we have surgery represented, pathology, we have coordinators, research, educators, various faculty. And then do think about, to what extent could you do your role with no technology, or how much do you rely on technology in your educational role? We have some pediatrics, some experts, lots of directors.
And another thing that we'll do as we go is sort of think about meta, like what are the tips, what are the tricks, what are the things to think about. And I guess first off, as Terry mentioned, we are going to demonstrate several different types of technology, but I wouldn't necessarily do that if I were you in a single session. I would kind of choose one way of polling and not try a variety. And then as you'll see here using Poll Everywhere, it did take a moment or so for folks to get going. And I don't know if you recall, but on our first slide, I had the instructions so that folks could have gotten in before we got started. So what we'd like to do is just sort of do a quick review of the backward design process. And it's really called backward design because when many of us get an opportunity or an invitation to speak, the first thing that we think about is what we're going to say. And in the backward design process, the idea is to first think about the context. So who are the learners? Where are they coming from? Where are they going to? What do they need to learn in this session and or context? And then what is the context? Is it clinical? Is it classroom? Is it small group? Is it simulation? And then your learning outcomes. So what is it that you want the students to, what's the knowledge, skills, and attitude you want them to attain through this process? And then once you have thought about those things, you want to move to assessment and feedback and how you will know that your learners have attained your outcomes. And then finally, you think about learning methods. And in the Quality Matters rubric, which was really about quality online teaching, one of the things they suggest is after that traditional backward design process, then you begin to think about the technology. And that's because some of us, when we find a new technology, we think it's cool and we want to use it without necessarily thinking about, does it support student learning and is it aligned with our goals? And so just to sort of emphasize a little bit this design idea, so according to Webster's, design is to plan, make decisions, or make something for specific use or purpose. And so when you think about purposes that you might have, it could be developing competence, it could be encouraging the growth of professional identity formation, it could be moving one from being supervised to autonomy, you could be interested in the social determinants of health, or trying to recruit medical students to your specialty. So as you think about that and reflect about the context and your purposes, how does that influence your technology choices? Another way to think about design is this idea of universal design for learning. And it's really a set of principles that aims to provide individuals with equal learning opportunities regardless of ability, gender, age, cultural background. And while it's designed for those, or its intent is to encourage diversity and inclusion, really the evidence shows that it supports learning for all learners. So it's kind of like the idea of the curb cuts, right? They were designed for one purpose, but it really benefited a lot of other folks. And as you look at these 12 tips from Carl Luke, this is a really great article, and references are on the last couple of slides, and I'll send those to Gary to distribute. But as you look at these 12 tips, many of them are already covered in that backward design process. So if you look at like number 2, it's defining clear, achievable learning outcomes. 11 is provide flexible opportunities for assessment and feedback. Many of them are about your teaching strategies. But I'd like to sort of highlight 3 through 5. And so when you think about diversifying the curriculum, it's really about thinking about who is who are in your images or your videos or your cases, and are those diverse. When you think about co-designing with learners, it's really about engaging your learners in the curriculum design process And that could be figuring out what their needs are, what their learning goals are, but it also can be having them co-create learning materials with you and even presenting those. And then number 5 is about getting diverse voices and perspectives in your presentations and teaching. And for me, a great example of this is at Nationwide Children's in Columbus. They had a program of patients as teachers, and they brought in their patients and their parents into the hospital to give their perspectives. And when I think about with technology, you could do recordings, and I think they did frequently record those presentations so that many could learn from them. And with Zoom and other teleconferencing, they could be present even though maybe they're at a distance.
So as you prepare for the changing role of instructional technology in medical education and health professions education, we all are experiencing plenty of change, right? So as you do this, you want to situate your plans and your preparation in context. And this particular article is actually from a decade ago. It's from 2011. And I found it very, we talked pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, during pandemic. This was 10 years ago, but and we've all had our context changed with COVID, with new ways to connect with our learners and with each other's, and the principles from this piece remain quite meaningful and important, mainly that we want to use technology to provide or support experiences for learners that are not otherwise possible, meaning that we can reach learners where they are, or when learners cannot get together for some reason, we can use technology to bring people together, like this national webinar that we're doing today. We can always maintain a focus on the principles of teaching and learning rather than that specific snazzy technology itself. We want to try things out, but we should always stay grounded in what's going to be useful and meaningful from a teaching and learning standpoint. And in this article is nicely written that the future is here. I think that is going to be an ever-present statement, but they really talked about how there's so much new information. There's an explosion of the quantity of information, that information is digitized, digitally available to us, that there are new learners and new settings and new instructional technologies that become available, and that change is upon us, and really acknowledging that this, very simple but complex statement. The world is moving faster. It's more complex, more technology driven. So highlighting the two points on the slide here: use the technology when it can support the learners in their learning, and not just thinking about the technology in isolation. So towards that strategic use, when we think about how we can teach strategically using educational technology, we can actually teach about certain technologies, like when we're teaching about the use of ultrasound, for example, point of care ultrasound at the bedtime, that is at the bedside, that is using a technology to teach and then to teach about the use of it. Similarly, we can teach our learners about using telemedicine or telehealth platforms. We're making use of them and teaching about them and best practices. Perhaps, at the same time, we're doing those both, or, just before the patient care visit, we will be helping our learners to understand a little bit more about the platform we're using and what it's doing while we make use of it. Another example is the EMR or the EHR, and we'll get into that a little bit more in this hour together. We are, with the strategic use of educational technology, having new ways to reach learners in different settings where they are, and bringing in more learners, and actually reducing costs, not having necessarily the cost of travel, or perhaps the cost of time for that, the resources, time and travel. So we can think strategically about bringing people together in this new way. And there are, of course, obstacles, because to varying degrees, there's different expertise in the use of the technology. There's different expertise in the use of technology by the faculty or other educators, by the differential expertise in the educational principles among the users, among the participants. There's also a varying degree of time that people have to prep or use the technology, or to train people in the use of the technology, and then to evaluate its use and how it impacted learning. And there are certainly resources that we may or may not have to either support or get in the way of the use of our educational technology. And sometimes those choices are out of our control. And sometimes in our roles, it might seem like it's out of control, but we are advocating for the use of a certain technology because we think it will have educational benefit, or that's been supported in the literature. So even when a choice of a particular educational technology seems like, well, that decision is made by someone else, somewhere else, well above me, and so on, there's a lot that one can do to provide a rationale and a support for a given type of technology and its use. And then perhaps an obstacle overcome can be learner location and learners at a distance. And it may be that we are now able to have our clerkship content with active participation all around a very large region through the use of technology. There may be some obstacles that we can get into. You may have questions about hybrid environments as well. But these are some obstacles we'll acknowledge and work to overcome.
So as you think about these obstacles, go ahead and find your reactions. Do these obstacles kind of resonate with you? And just go ahead and give a thumbs up or a hand up or something if these resonate with you.
And you can certainly put in the chat if you came today to this session thinking with other obstacles in mind, or some of these. So what obstacles come to mind when you're thinking about implementing educational technology in your settings? You can put that in the chat.
And while you're doing that, for me, one of the big ones that I'm hearing these days is about hybrid. And some quick tips for me are, I was in a meeting recently where they were using Zoom to have a hybrid experience. And basically I just got on my phone, logged into Zoom, and was able to chat. So it kind of evened that experience. I was able to communicate with the folks at a distance, see what they were saying. So that made it sort of even. And then also things like Poll Everywhere, where all the responses are sent by mobile device and they all appear together, is another way to sort of even that hybrid experience. But typically you really need to think and plan what are your objectives and how you're going to manage those hybrid events. Are there questions that you're seeing, Terry?
We are having various obstacles coming up in terms of staff support for the various modalities, local support for technology and who's going to help with when there are glitches, faculty related concerns, not feeling like they have the time or motivation to learn something new, or they're afraid to fail when using something new in front of students despite preparing. And some others, non-standardized experience if the student only has one thing like an iPad versus a laptop versus a phone. And then trying things out in a safe environment, even being open to experimenting, but trying them out in a safe environment. You know, Larry and I felt a little, you know, stressed. We better have our polls and chats and things working well for this, but we were fully prepared if all, I guess not if all electricity went out, but if our slides didn't show, we did have, you know, backup options. But those are some really important considerations that people are asking about. And sometimes it can be helpful to acknowledge that let's try this together. I've put in the preparation, but I'd love your feedback, and we'll aim to make it work best to support your learning, but there may be ways that it doesn't, and I'd like to know about that, or, you know, those kind of things.
And part of that can be sort of building your psychological safety that it's okay to try, and that it's okay for them to try things and get feedback. And so it's could be an excellent exercise in that activity. So Terry, when you're making, sorry, I'm going to back up a step. So we're kind of moving on to outcomes. We've talked about context, and we're moving on to outcomes. And really in medical education, health professions education, it's really about competencies, and entrustable professional activities are the outcomes that frequently we're seeking. And when you think about these different competencies, what are the ways that technology can support learners in acquiring these competencies? And so there's a variety of things, and we did not want to give or even attempt to give what we thought was a comprehensive list, because it is practically impossible, because I think Terry mentioned the world is changing ever faster. So Terry, when you're making choices, what kind of questions are you asking, or how do you know that you're making a good choice?
Yeah, I might have certain apps or tech choices that I think work well for me. And then I'm thinking, well, will this be available and accessible to my faculty colleagues, the learners in my setting? Will they be able to make use of it? So from an accessibility standpoint, and then certainly aspects of credibility and how up to date is that resource, and how user friendly it's going to be, and can I use it at the bedside in the clinical setting, and so on.
And as you were reading the questions that were coming up in the chat, it really reminded me that making sure that the things that you're using are supported. And if they're not supported, are they prohibited? So in some cases, certain hospitals will block certain IP addresses, and so certain things just won't work, even though it might be freely available elsewhere. So, so thinking about what's supported by your university, the hospital, the library, what things, I think, as you mentioned, your specialty, if there's something that an app that they really highlight or prefer, then those are things that will tend to be better supported, so your faculty colleagues won't have to do that, and your learners will have a better experience.
And I think the librarians can be such a wonderful resource here. They're receiving the requests for this or that, and then going to them with questions. They often can make suggestions or let you know about something that's available that you might not have, that is being used in another setting that might be useful in your setting as well. So we're getting some things in the chat about setting expectations and their own expectations at the beginning of each session from a content and technology standpoint, asking learners what works well after a session. There's comments about blocking all things Google at given institutions, and then what to do about that. Padlets as collaborative workspaces that work across institutions.
Absolutely. One of the things I did want to mention about the librarians is they'll also be able to give you feedback about what's happening with your learners, because sometimes the learners will come to them and they'll have they might have gathered information about what's working or not working. So that's another great source of information. So now we have a poll. We've talked about context and we've talked about outcomes, and we're moving on to assessment now. And so the question is, most assessments are formative. Gary, can you launch the poll? All right, so it looks like we have 17 folks, and if you would just sort of unmute for a second, and somebody who agreed with that, would you feel free to just sort of share why you agree with that that question, or that why you agreed with most assessment are formative?
Hi, this is
Hi.
Rosalie. I'm from UNLV School of Medicine. I selected agree that it's formative. We do PBL and we give direct feedback during tutorial sessions. So it's not always a test, but in skills development, we're assessing students' capabilities. So most of the time where it's formative for us.
Excellent. And then somebody who disagreed, would you feel free to share why you disagreed?
I'll go. I'm Adam Meyer from the University of Minnesota. I disagreed because I think there's still some of that kind of traditional thought of assessment being a midterm and a final. I think a follow-up question should it be formative? I would agree that it should be formative, and we are in our school. We are pushing towards that and trying to get that mindset of not just a midterm, not just a final, but these kind of quick hit formative assessments to see where students are at. So it's more kind of assessment for learning rather than assessment of learning.
Excellent. So all I have to say to that is rah, rah, rah for Skyuma. And Adam will understand that. One of the reasons that we wanted to show you this question was kind of to build the idea that you can use this type of question to start a debate, right? And so we didn't go into it very much, but this type of question can be used to help learners sort of go in deeper. And then the other thing that we wanted to show you was that it's kind of a life hack, right? So when you're using Zoom polls, if you put a Q and then A, B, or A, B, C, D, E, then you can reuse that poll over and over again, particularly if you don't want the data. So if you don't want to use the data later, Zoom will erase the data if you keep reusing the poll. But if it's just for sort of getting learners to respond in the midst of a session, then this is a great way to do that and not have to rebuild, and you can edit your slides as opposed to having edit your slides and the poll in Zoom. All right. So some other ways to think about assessment, and a lot of these are really in Make It Stick from Brown et al., is in this acronym of SPARK. The S stands for space recall and interleaving. And that space recall is the idea of not just asking or assessing learners right after they do something, but having some space in there. And the harder they work to recall, the more likely it is that they will remember long-term. So putting some space in there can help with that. And then interleaving is mixing in subjects from maybe previous lessons or courses, and that will also help them to remember. And then practice retrieving prior knowledge is really great at the beginning of a session. So you can ask questions about things maybe they learned before your course or before your session. And it really allows you to correct maybe any misconceptions, maybe share how you think about that content, and really have a shared understanding of what you're going to do and how you're going to use it. Authentic assessments, I think about the great work that we do in our clinical skills labs with simulations and standardized patients, and as a way, and sort of going on with those strategic ways of using technology. You can assess learners on their use of those technologies. Just a second. So at the end of a session, you can review important points. And then when you're thinking about whether or not somebody is going to advance, so you're using that sort of formative or summative assessment to see if they can advance, you can use these knowledge assessments. So we did want to share with you a cool way to use technology in the midst of this and demonstrate it. But I thought that you might have questions about how we did it if we just sort of launched into it. So I'm going to share my iPhone using Zoom. And basically what you do is when you go to share your content, you select iPhone. And if you're going to show a video either on your iPhone or ever, you're going to want to check the share sound in the lower left-hand corner. So when you do that, share your iPhone, it's going to come up with, Zoom will come up with these sort of questions that are over here on the right. And then you just select your Zoom meeting and then you'll be sharing your iPhone. So we've practiced this. We think it's going to work. We're excited about it. So I'm going to stop this share. I am not seeing the option on my thing. Gary, do you know if that's something that you're able to enable?
What are you looking for, Larry?
Being able to share my iPhone.
Oh. That I have no idea how to even do that.
You're teaching us how to share.
I made you a co-host, so I was assuming that you'd be able to do whatever you needed to as a host.
When you go share screen, are you able to share your iPhone?
Well, I don't use an iPhone, so I have.
But it would be in your Zoom options.
No, I don't see it.
Okay, so maybe it's something that isn't.
You would see me block that out.
Yeah. So this is a good example of where it didn't work. And The thing that we wanted to share with you was this just-in-time teaching app. So again, giving a thumbs up. How many of you are familiar with this app? So I can see Bruce's thumb is up.
And some in the chat are saying they're familiar.
Yeah. Elizabeth, do you think you'd be able to share a little bit about what the just-in-time teaching app does?
Sure. So I'm very fortunate to work very closely with Alice Funari, who invented the app. So pretty much it is a very nicely compressed compendium with several options if you want to teach in a clinical environment. So you have a large array of teaching questions, teaching topics. You find the how to teach them, how to introduce them. You also find about giving feedback. So it's, in other words, if you want to teach in a clinical environment and you have to find out fast and you don't know how, go to the app and read through the infographics. You can use them in the classroom, start the conversation, and you're all set. And by the way, I know that Alice is always looking for collaborators. So if you want to write some, let her know or let me know. So we can accommodate that.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. And so another thing that's part of this is each of them has practice questions. So you can look in for pediatrics or classroom teaching or whatever topic it is, and there'll be some practice questions built in there. So that's a very rich resource, and really wanted to highlight that with you.
All right, so we couldn't share the phone, but now you know it is a possibility on some Zoom platforms. But so far we haven't had any leaders of the webinar be muted. You know, am I on mute? Okay, but maybe it'll still happen by the end of the hour. Strategic uses of educational technology with regard to the EMR, EHR is a big one for our learners in the healthcare profession. And some ways to think about how we're going to have our learners use electronic health records is, to what level will they be involved? How will they be involved? What's going to be permitted? And what are you going to advocate for? So will they have access to the EMR, and what type of access is like the biggest, grandest question. You know, you may be told that they will not have access at all. And then I would say that is a role for advocating for students to meaningfully participate in the medical record. There may be that students can have access to view only or to read what's going on in the medical record. And you know, that might work for some settings or for some areas, maybe in the preclinical portion of the curriculum. And then, but certainly more engagement would be to be able to document in the medical record. And that would be good for all clinical medical students or health profession students to be able to document in the medical record. There's proposing orders. That would be maybe something for the senior students, or maybe they're proposed orders and then only accepted if, you know, if it's allowable by the licensed provider and so on. There may be a test environment, something like a playground where students can either be taught or play around with, where there's no impact on actual patients, but they can understand and make use of patient records for their learning purposes. And some facilities use that during the training in how students should use a record. And as for the training itself, you know, there's the training on the principles of use, like why are we using a medical record? What's its purpose? How do we make use of it from a healthcare standpoint, from a improving patient care standpoint, then from a legal and documentation standpoint. there are the tips and the how-tos, and sometimes near peers can be very helpful in training in training students, and maybe residents or senior students, helping junior students know what's best to do. And then there are other considerations in terms of the grander principles of privacy and professionalism in terms of how you're going to set up your training. And often the EMR is chosen by someone else. It's either going to be, it's this one, Epic, it's Cerner, it's whatever it is. And those companies may have training modules, but they're not often tailored for the student per se. So you may have add-ons or modifications tailored to the students. And then we really want to remember what, in all settings, but what can we learn from our students? So they will be telling us valuable information, maybe about the EMR, about their use of the EMR. They may come in having been, I worked for a year as a scribe for that company, and they may have a ton of knowledge about the ins and outs of it. So always remember, we can learn from our students even as we are training and teaching them. And just a reminder that, so there may be some workshops that you can find, besides what comes from from Epic, from Cerner, that are how to make best use of an EHR for medical students. And these are going to be mainly in those general principles of use. And this is also a reminder to you all that as you innovate and bring in either educational technology or something else, that there's a way to have a medical education scholarship. Here's the MedEd portal, if you study something or plan something out. So both a resource for you and then a way that you can share the scholarship that you're doing. So we're going to take a moment to think about social media. That's in some ways educational technology and a part of our world. And so we had, some of us had written these 12 tips for using social media as a medical educator, many years ago. And even then we were thinking about the general principles of how you want to engage with other people in the real world and then in the online world. And, those principles apply. A little shout out for, ACE has a high involvement on Twitter and maybe some other platforms. It really brings together medical educators from all across the globe, sometimes synchronously for a chat on a given topic, and sometimes asynchronously just in your social media feeds. There's faculty development, there's journal clubs, there's Q&A. And so that's a real nice way to get engaged. There's the MedEd chat, and that has been a long running endeavor on Thursday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern. But also think about, as you make use of social media, we're going to remind you about your role as a leader. So you might be a user of social media in your personal or your individual life, and then there's your role as a leader, and what are some of the considerations for social media. And always think about, the good aspects as well. So we want you to reflect on your own ways of use, or how you want to represent yourself, or what's your true identity offline and online, and your goals for the use. It's always okay to kind of pause and learn and look around before you dive in, maybe to that next platform. Some of you are using this one, but not that one yet. Feeling a little uncertain about making use of TikTok, but you already use Twitter or something in between. So those are some ways to, think about it, understand the environment before you dive in, think about the existing guidelines and principles for use. And we'll talk about that a bit more, but, we really want to also think about the positive aspects to engage and learn and teach and mentor, and to become part of a community, a learning community in these spaces. And so one of the powerful uses of either on social media or otherwise is through the use of video. So I'll toss it to Larry for a moment, and then we'll come back to some more social media.
And so really, I think in a nutshell, video is a very powerful tool. You can teach any type of knowledge, skill, or attitude using video. And it allows you to really be more portable and get into co-creation. And one of the things that can be kind of fun is that students will make videos based on what they're learning, and many of those are on YouTube, and those can be a fun way to engage students and that they can co-create. But in some cases, they look like a music video, and so maybe not always the professional appearance that you would want a student to present. So I'm gonna toss it back to Terry.
So what, and you could put in the chat if you have other considerations, but certainly what do you need to keep in mind when you're thinking about your own use of social media and your use as a leader? There will be school or university policies that apply to faculty, that apply to employees, that apply to students, and it's helpful to be cognizant of those. There will be certainly hospital policies. Some hospitals might have the everything's blocked perspective, and some may be more a little more adventuresome, or with the times that we're all our patients are using social media, so we want to understand how we can do it safely and then allow it. We want to think about not just patient privacy, but also the privacy of students' records. Think about what to share and not to share. And I love this little snapshot of the little booklet, because you can still write in your own personal journal in pen or pencil instead of posting, because as Elizabeth wrote in the chat, you know, you can assume it's going to be there forever. Things can be taken down, but they can be, but that doesn't mean that they're not still there in some other sense. But I really like, you know, that Elizabeth added also, you know, the role modeling. What can you do in your role as a leader to use social media for good, and then also, you know, role model and teach and learn from people in an online community that you might not have been able to learn from in person. And, you know, all of these kind of considerations and caveats, you know, we want, my colleague Kathy Chrétien and I put together this model several years back to think about, you know, in our health professions, we need to earn and maintain the public's trust in healthcare professionals, in education, in educators. And so when we keep that in mind, that it's all resting on a base of earning and maintaining the public's trust in ourselves, then we can go further. Next step is to make sure that we have the appropriate level of security and not doing things that are going to jeopardize either our patients or our learners or our careers in posting. And then when we have that covered, we can then go on to reflect and discover. We can navigate relationships with our learners, potentially with our patients, or at least think through how we're going to do that, if we're going to do that in the online social media space. And then get to discovery, where we're using social media to make improvements in patients' health on an individual, community, or, you know, public health level. And then what do we mean by enhancing one's career or mentoring others? Well, there's, and we can go on to the next slide. When we think about social media and using social media for good, we can help your learners to use it well we did a study of active social media users among medical students, and some of their main positives were to have a voice and to connect with people that are traditionally higher on the hierarchy, connecting with mentors, connecting for advocating and doing some work in the equity space and in terms of diversity, and advocating on behalf of patients or learners or other communities, and then really learning in a community. And this was a really nice article by some folks, including Avital Oglasser and others, in harnessing the power of medical Twitter for mentorship. And you can see that there are lots of representations of, for example, Black men in medicine, or I look like a surgeon, where women are posting about what they look like as a surgeon, or docs with disabilities, and other ways to amplify others' voices, with a Follow Friday or a thing like that. Now, this is for Twitter. There are many other social media applications and platforms, but the kind of principles of advocating and amplifying others' voices still apply, and that kind of connecting our learners with others in the field. As Match Day just came and went last week for our senior medical students, there was so much connection around helping our learners who didn't match, and supporting them, and then the joy of matching and connecting with their future community when they're going to go relocate in a new place. So okay, we've all been zoomed out over the past few years. We've all muted and unmuted ourselves. As we come to the end of our hour together, where we try to bring a lot of principles to you, and a lot for you to think about, we want to revisit and make sure that we have touched on each of our objectives, and we've hoped to address these. And we want to know from you, what are you still thinking about? What will you act on as a result of our discussion today? How will you make context influenced and evidence-based choices to support learning with technology? And what we can do is, we'd love to know what you're going to take forward, either what's still on your mind and what questions you have, but what are you going to bring forward, your take-home points? What was the most important thing you learned today? And please go ahead and use the Zoom chat, although we'll welcome unmuting and participation verbally as well. What was the most important thing you learned today or want to learn more about?
So Adam, it's just-in-time teaching, JITT. Yep, thanks for posting that, Elizabeth.
Yeah, so if I may, you get it from the Play Store, and you get it from whatever it is that Apple does.
Yeah.
I think you have to look for just-in-time
Teaching.
infographics, because then you get the correct, then it finds it. That's what it has to look like, yeah.
Yes, you have to make sure that you use the word infographics after JIT. Hi, Dr. Schlegel.
Hi there.
Looks right.
That looks right. Good. Yep.
So some are going to include or develop videos. What are some of your other?
So I like New England Journal of Medicine has videos that are cases and have clinical videos in clinical settings. And interestingly, I was testing this out. I could not share a YouTube video on my phone in Zoom. It would say this isn't supported. So I think there's something about that connection that's not working. But other than that, those videos are a great source of content. All right.
And anything you're still struggling with or that you want to dig into deeper, any questions that you have or solutions that you have that you want to share with each other in this community. So we want to share the New England Journal of Medicine videos, and then some of you have blogs and e-learning bites that can be very helpful.
So I just put the link to the New England Journal of Medicine multimedia site. So there's more than just videos there. It does require you to register, but you can get sort of a free registration that enables you to see the videos. And then you get a couple of articles a month that you can download. All right.
Right, as we're nearing the end of the hour, I unfortunately have to shut us off a minute or two early because I have to walk across campus to another meeting at 2 o'clock that I'll be late for. So I really want to thank Terry and Larry for doing this presentation. It was fantastic. And you will be receiving an email to complete the evaluation form. And once I get the handout from Larry, I'll forward that out to everybody as well.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having us. I hope we gave everyone a bit to think about and carry on. Thank you.
Good to see everybody.
Thank you.